The world grows quiet, and the story begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Sounds of Stories. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Sounds of Stories. Tonight's tale is My Double and How He Undid Me. We've done a humorous reimagining of it, and it's a tale of mistaken identity, unwanted self-improvement, and the unsettling discovery that the person most qualified to criticize you might just be you. Now, let the pages turn. A reimagining of My Double and How He Undid Me, written by E. Hale. My name is Edwin P. Finch, and until the remarkable events I'm about to relate, I considered myself a thoroughly ordinary man. Not a successful man, mind you, nor an especially handsome one, nor even a particularly organized one. Just ordinary. Indeed, if there was one thing upon which I prided myself, it was my complete lack of distinction. I had never climbed a mountain, discovered a continent, or won so much as a pie at a church raffle. I occupied a modest house on Maple Street, held a modest position at a modest insurance office, and possessed what my barber described as a dependable face. Life proceeded in this agreeable fashion until the Tuesday on which I met myself. The day began badly. I awoke 20 minutes late, having somehow managed to silence my alarm without becoming conscious of it. My hurried attempt to dress resulted in my fastening my collar button through the wrong hole, a mistake I didn't discover until arriving at work. Breakfast fared no better. While attempting to butter a piece of toast, I dropped it directly onto the kitchen floor. Now, many people subscribe to the so-called 5-second rule. I've always regarded this principle as less a rule and more of a desperate prayer. Unfortunately, desperation prevailed. The toast was retrieved, inspected, and consumed. By noon, I was regretting that decision. At the office, matters deteriorated further. My supervisor, Mr. Peabody, summoned me into his office and demanded to know why I had failed to attend a department meeting. I explained that I had never been informed of any meeting. Mr. Peabody informed me that the notice had been posted on the bulletin board for a week. I explained that I hadn't looked at the bulletin board. He suggested that this was the root of the problem. Well, after several additional observations which did little to improve my mood, I returned to my desk feeling thoroughly defeated. By the time I left work that evening, I had spilled coffee on my shirt, misplaced a report, and walked into a door that I myself opened. I was therefore in a state of considerable irritation that I turned on to Market Street and first encountered the man who would alter the course of my life. The fellow stood outside a bakery. At first, I paid him little attention. My thoughts were occupied with dinner and whether I possessed sufficient energy to prepare it. Then the man turned his head. I stopped walking. The man stopped chewing. We stared at one another. A strange sensation passed over me, the sort of sensation one experiences when suddenly realizing one's forgotten something important, or when discovering that a portrait's eyes seem to follow one about a room. The man looked exactly like me. Not merely similar, not approximately. Exactly. The same height, the same build, the same thinning brown hair, the same nose which my Aunt Margaret had once described as perfectly adequate. Even his expression matched my own bewilderment. For several moments, neither of us moved. Then the stranger lowered the pastry in his hand. "Well," he said, his voice was my voice. I nearly fainted. "Well?" I managed to reply. The stranger smiled. I was alarmed to discover that my smile looked slightly ridiculous. "There you are," he said. "There who is?" "Well, me, of course." I blinked. The stranger sighed. "Honestly, Edwin, I've been looking everywhere for us." The fact that he knew my name did little to calm me. "How do you know who I am?" "Because I am who you are." I considered this statement carefully. Then I considered whether I might be suffering from heat stroke. The stranger appeared to notice my uncertainty. Perhaps we'd better sit down, he said. Before I could object, he gestured toward a nearby bench. Somehow, I found myself following him. To this day, I can't explain why. Perhaps curiosity overpowered common sense. Perhaps shock had temporarily disabled my judgment. Or perhaps I was simply too tired to argue with myself. We sat. The stranger took another bite of his pastry. I watched him suspiciously, and after a moment he held out a paper bag. "Would you like one?" "No. They're excellent. I don't want a pastry. I want answers." Fair enough." He swallowed thoughtfully. "My name is Edwin P. Finch." "No, it isn't." "It certainly is." "It happens to be mine." "Precisely." I rubbed my temples. A headache was beginning to form. "Who are you?" The stranger considered. That, he admitted, is a surprisingly difficult question." "You don't know?" "Oh, I know. I simply don't think you'll like the answer." "I already don't like the answer." "Excellent. Then we're making progress." I stared at him. He stared back. The resemblance was so perfect that it became increasingly difficult to determine which of us should feel more uncomfortable. Finally, he nodded. "Tell you what," he said. "Well, let's start with something simple." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that you're going home to eat the last can of soup in your pantry because you forgot to buy groceries again." I froze. He continued. "Afterward, you'll spend an hour looking for your reading glasses before discovering they're already on your face." My mouth fell open. "And tomorrow morning," he added, "you'll remember that you promised your mother you'd call her 3 days ago." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How do you know these things?" The stranger grinned, and because it was my grin, I disliked it immediately. "Edwin," he said, rising from the bench, "who do you suppose forgets all those things?" With that, he tipped his hat, picked up his bag of pastries, and began walking down the street. I leapt to my feet. "Wait!" He paused. "What? Where are you going?" The stranger smiled once more. "To fix a few mistakes." Then he disappeared into the evening crowd, leaving me alone on the bench with a pounding headache and a deeply unsettling suspicion that my life was about to become considerably more complicated. I didn't sleep well that night. This was hardly surprising. Most men, after encountering a perfect duplicate of themselves outside a bakery, would experience some difficulty settling into a restful slumber. I, however, surpassed all reasonable explanations. I slept badly with enthusiasm. Every creak of the house became evidence of an intruder. Every shadow suggested the presence of a second Edwin P. Finch lurking in the darkness. At one point, I awoke convinced that I had discovered my double standing beside my bed. It was a coat rack, but in fairness, it was a very suspicious coat rack. And morning brought no relief. As predicted, I remembered my overdue promise to call my mother. Unfortunately, I remembered this while brushing my teeth. The resulting conversation was awkward for everyone involved. "Edwin," she exclaimed, "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." I attempted to deny the charge. Toothpaste interfered with my defense. My mother accepted this as confirmation. After hanging up, I spent several minutes staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The fellow staring back looked entirely ordinary. The same tired eyes, the same thinning hair, the same expression of perpetual mild confusion. Yet, somewhere in town, there existed another version of that face. The thought followed me all day. At work, I accomplished almost nothing. I misplaced 2 folders, answered a telephone that wasn't ringing, and accidentally signed my name on someone else's paperwork. By 4 o'clock, Mr. Peabody had asked whether I was feeling unwell. I considered explaining that I had recently discovered a second copy of myself roaming the city. Instead, I claimed to have a headache. Mr. Peabody found this explanation more believable. When the workday finally ended, I returned home determined to put the entire matter out of my mind. This plan failed immediately. A package awaited me on the front porch. The label bore my name. Curious, I carried it inside. The package contained 3 items: a new kitchen faucet, a set of replacement batteries, and a handwritten note. The note read, "The faucet's been leaking for 6 months. The batteries in your smoke detector died last November. You're welcome, Edwin." I stared at the note. Then I stared at the faucet. Then at the ceiling. "Absolutely not," I said aloud. The ceiling offered no opinion. 10 minutes later, there came a knock at the door. I opened it. My double stood on the porch carrying a toolbox. "Good evening," he said cheerfully. "No." He blinked. "No? No. I haven't asked anything yet. I know, the answer is still no." The double sighed. "You're going to make this difficult, aren't you? You sent me a faucet. You needed a faucet. I didn't ask for a faucet. You also didn't fix the old one." This was unfortunately true. The double peered past me into the house. His expression darkened. "Oh dear." I folded my arms. "What now? Have you looked at this place recently?" "I live here." "That's not what I asked." Before I could stop him, he stepped inside. What followed was among the most insulting experiences of my life. The double wandered from room to room, muttering observations. "The lamp's broken." "I know." "Then why is it still broken?" "I've been meaning to fix it." "You've been meaning to fix it since Easter." "It wasn't this Easter." "Exactly." He moved into the kitchen. "These vegetables have achieved independence." "They're not that old." "One of the carrots collapsed." The double nodded toward it. "I rest my case." For the next hour, he repaired things: the faucet, the lamp, a cabinet door that hadn't closed properly for 3 years. Meanwhile, I followed him throughout the house, issuing increasingly ineffective objections. "You can't just come in here." "Apparently, I can. This is my home. Then take better care of it." By the time he finished, the place looked noticeably improved. This irritated me greatly. At the front door, he packed away his tools. "There," he said, "much better." "I didn't ask for your help." "No," he agreed, "you rarely ask for help." The remark landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I disliked him for it. The double adjusted his hat. "Tell me something, Edwin." "What?" "When was the last time you enjoyed your life?" I frowned. "What sort of question is that?" "A simple one." I searched for an answer. None arrived. The double smiled sadly. "Exactly." Then he headed toward the sidewalk. I watched him go. Halfway down the street, he turned. "Oh, one more thing." "What?" "Don't make any plans for Saturday." "Why?" "Because your cousin Martha's birthday party's Saturday." My stomach dropped. I'd completely forgotten. The double nodded knowingly. "Thought so." Then he disappeared around the corner. I remained on the porch for several minutes. The evening breeze rustled through the trees. Inside the house, the faucet no longer dripped. The cabinet door closed perfectly. The smoke detector possessed functioning batteries. Everything was better. And somehow, that made me furious. For the first time in my life, I found myself competing with another Edwin P. Finch. The troubling part was that he appeared to be winning. For the first few days following the arrival of my double, I comforted myself with one simple belief. Surely the novelty would wear off. People might be amused by encountering 2 Edwin P. Finches for a time, but eventually the excitement would fade. The duplicate would grow bored, return to whatever mysterious realm had produced him, and I would resume my ordinary existence. This proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. The first indication came at work. On Monday morning, I entered the office and was immediately greeted by Miss Holloway from accounting.
"Miss Finch," she said warmly, "that was the sweetest thing."
I stopped. What was?
"The flowers."
What flowers?
"The flowers you sent to Mrs. Peterson after her surgery."
I stared at her. I sent flowers? Miss Holloway laughed.
"Modesty does not suit you."
Before I could explain that I had sent no flowers and in fact had only learned of Mrs. Peterson's surgery moments ago, she had already disappeared down the hall. I stood there in bewilderment. And that's when things aggressively started going downhill. By lunchtime, 3 separate coworkers had complimented me. One praised my generosity, another admired my thoughtfulness, and a third thanked me for helping me reorganize a filing system over the weekend. I had done none of those things. The most productive thing I had accomplished over the weekend was locating a sock I had misplaced in February. But when I returned home that evening, I found my double sitting on my porch swing. He was reading a book. My book. "Good evening," he said. "What have you done?" I looked genuinely puzzled. "I need you to be more specific." "Flowers." "Oh, yes. You sent flowers. Mrs. Peterson had surgery." "I don't even know Mrs. Peterson." "You do." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. This, I was discovering, was one of the chief disadvantages of arguing with oneself. The fellow already knew all of your points. "I don't understand why you're doing these things." My double marked his place in the book. "Because they need doing. Nobody asked you." "Nonsense. People ask all the time." "They do?" "Certainly." He gestured vaguely toward the street. "They simply use different words." I sat heavily on the porch step. "What does that even mean?" "It means that when someone says, 'I don't know how I'll manage,' they're often asking for help." I frowned. "That sounds exhausting." "Well, it can be." For some reason, this answer irritated me even more. The following Saturday brought Cousin Martha's birthday party. I attended reluctantly. Family gatherings had never been my preferred form of entertainment. My relatives possessed an extraordinary talent for discussing embarrassing childhood incidents while one was attempting to eat potato salad. As I approached Martha's house, I noticed something troubling. Several cars were already parked outside. One of them belonged to my double. I considered turning around. Unfortunately, my mother spotted me from a window. Escape became impossible. The party was in full swing when I entered. Children raced through the house shrieking. Uncles argued about sports. Someone had placed raisins in perfectly innocent potato salad. In short, it was a family gathering. Then I saw him. My double stood in the center of the room, surrounded by relatives, not trapped by them, surrounded. There's an important distinction. He was telling a story. People were laughing, actually laughing, at an Edwin P. Finch. I had not previously believed such a thing possible. "There's the other one," shouted Cousin Martha. Every head turned. I disliked being the center of attention under the best circumstances. Being compared against a superior version of myself was considerably worse. My mother hurried over. "Edwin!" I brightened slightly. At last, a familiar ally. Then she smiled and said, "You should have seen your brother." "He isn't my brother." "He helped me carry 3 boxes this morning." I blinked. "You made him carry boxes?" "He offered." This statement alone should have exposed him as an imposter. No genuine Edwin P. Finch has ever voluntarily carried boxes. Yet, nobody seems suspicious. Throughout the afternoon, the humiliation continued. My double helped serve food. My double entertained the children. My double repaired a lawn chair. A lawn chair! The man apparently couldn't walk past broken furniture without fixing it. The final blow came from my dog. His name was Winston. He'd been my loyal companion for 6 years. Together, we had endured thunderstorms, moving day, and an unfortunate incident involving a Thanksgiving turkey. Our bond was unshakable, or so I believed. At one point, Winston wandered into the backyard where several of us were gathered. Naturally, I called him. "Winston!" His ears perked up. His tail wagged. Then he ran directly past me and launched himself onto my double's lap. That traitor. My double scratched behind the dog's ears. Winston looked blissfully happy. I felt betrayed. "Clever fellow," my double remarked. "He used to like me. He still likes you. He clearly prefers you." Winston rolled onto his back and demanded a belly rub. My case was strengthened considerably. That evening, after the party had ended, I found myself walking home beside my double. The summer air was pleasant. The neighborhood was quiet. For several blocks, neither of us spoke. At last, I broke the silence. "This doesn't bother you?" "What?" "All of it." He glanced at me. "The confusion? The comparisons? The fact that everyone seems to like you more than they like me?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but genuinely. "My dear Edwin," he said, "they don't like me more." "It certainly appears that way." "No," he shook his head. "They like the version of you that's been paying attention." I had no immediate response. The remark settled over me like an uncomfortable blanket. Ahead of us, the lights of my house came into view. My double slowed. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "Why?" "Because tomorrow you're having lunch with Mr. Peabody." I stopped walking. "I am?" "You forgot, didn't you?" I had, completely. The double sighed. "Honestly, Edwin?" Then he continued down the street, leaving me standing alone beneath the glow of the street lamp. For the first time since meeting him, a truly unsettling possibility occurred to me. What if people didn't prefer him because he was my double? What if they preferred him because he was simply a better Edwin P. Finch? There comes a point in every man's life when reason abandons him. For some, this occurs during a heated political discussion. For others, it happens while assembling furniture from a box containing 1,400 parts and instructions apparently translated from Icelandic into Portuguese and then into English. For me, it happened on a Thursday afternoon when my supervisor called me into his office and congratulated me. The experience was so unusual that I immediately suspected foul play. "Sit down, Finch," said Mr. Peabody. His tone was pleasant. I grew alarmed, and then I sat. Mr. Peabody folded his hands and smiled. I became even more alarmed. "Good work on the Henderson account." I blinked. "The Henderson account? Excellent initiative." I nodded cautiously. Thank you. That's exactly the sort of effort we need around here." I nodded again. Then I made a terrible mistake. I asked a question. "What initiative would that be exactly?" Mr. Peabody looked surprised. "The proposal." My stomach sank. "What proposal?" "The one you dropped off yesterday." I closed my eyes. When I opened them, Mr. Peabody was still there, unfortunately. The double had struck again. Apparently, while I had spent Wednesday evening watching a documentary about unusually large pumpkins, another Edwin P. Finch had submitted an impressive proposal to upper management. I left the office with a smile on my face and murder in my heart. Not actual murder, of course, more of a strongly worded frustration. Still, it was the closest I had come. That evening, I had made a decision. The double had to be stopped. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and developed what I considered a brilliant investigative strategy. The plan consisted of 3 objectives. First, determine where the double lived. Second, discover his true intentions. Third, expose him as a fraud. Looking back, the plan may have lacked detail. At the time, however, it seemed masterful. The following morning, I began my surveillance. This proved more difficult than expected. The double appeared to possess an uncanny awareness of his surroundings. Every time I attempted to follow him discreetly, he would glance over his shoulder and wave. Not suspiciously, cheerfully, as though I were a friend. This somehow made the matters worse. At one point, I hid behind a newspaper. He purchased me a coffee. At another point, I concealed myself behind a parked delivery truck. He left a sandwich on the hood of my car. The man was impossible. Nevertheless, I persisted. Over the next several days, I compiled a substantial collection of observations. The double visited elderly neighbors. The double carried groceries. The double returned lost wallets. The double volunteered at community events. The double even helped organize a charity fundraiser. My notebook gradually transformed from an indictment into an extraordinarily flattering biography. This was not the result I had intended. Still, I refused to surrender. Surely there had to be something suspicious. Nobody was that helpful. Nobody. The breakthrough came on Sunday, or so I believed. That afternoon, I observed the double entering the public library carrying a folder. A folder. At last. The sort of object that might reasonably contain evidence of villainy. I followed him inside. The library was quiet. Sunlight filtered through tall windows and illuminated rows of bookshelves. Somewhere in the distance, a librarian was engaged in the secret task of glaring at anyone who appeared capable of making noise. I slipped between the stacks and observed my quarry. The double sat at a table. He opened the folder. I leaned forward. This was it. The secret, the truth, the revelation. Then a hand landed on my shoulder. I nearly screamed. The librarian frowned. "Mr. Finch?" I swallowed. "Yes? You've been staring at that man for 40 minutes. "I have not. You've crawled behind 3 bookshelves." I said nothing. "Last week you attempted to hide inside the history section. It seemed reasonable at that time." The librarian removed her glasses. "Mr. Finch, you're aware that the man you're spying on volunteers here twice a week?" I stared. "He does what?" "He helps people learn to read." The word struck me like a physical blow. Learn to read? I turned slowly toward the double. At that very moment, an elderly gentleman approached his table carrying a stack of books. The double smiled warmly and helped him find a seat. The old man looked grateful. The double looked happy. Meanwhile, I was being scolded by a librarian. The contrast was becoming unbearable. I returned home in a state of profound irritation. Winston greeted me at the door, and for a brief moment I took comfort in the loyalty of my dog. Then I noticed the new collar around his neck. Attached was a small brass tag. It read, "If found, please return to Edwin P. Finch." Beneath that was my phone number. I frowned. I had never purchased such a tag. The double had. Of course he had. Winston wagged his tail. Traitor. I collapsed into my armchair and stared at the ceiling. Something was wrong with my strategy. Every attempt to expose the double merely revealed another example of his competence. Every investigation made him appear more admirable. Every confrontation made me appear more ridiculous. The realization was deeply unsettling. For the first time, I began to suspect that my campaign was not harming him at all. It was harming me. Several days later, matters reached their lowest point. The double and I had attended a neighborhood meeting. I hadn't intended to go, but unfortunately, the double reminded me. And unfortunately, he was correct. The meeting concerned a community garden. I had no interest in gardening. Plants and I had long maintained a mutual, respectful distance. Yet, there I sat while neighbors discussed tomatoes. And at some point, frustration overcame caution. I rose to my feet. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced. The room fell silent. The double looked concerned. Encouraged by this, I continued, "There's something you should know." Several neighbors exchanged glances. I pointed dramatically across the room. "That man is an imposter." The silence deepened. The double sighed. The woman near the front raised her hand. "Which one?" I hesitated. The room erupted in laughter. Even I had to admit it was a fair question. The double buried his face in his hands. The meeting eventually resumed. The tomatoes prevailed. Later that evening, as we walked home together, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, the double broke the silence. "How's the campaign going?" I groaned. "You know about that? Edwin, you followed me into a library." "That's fair. You hid behind a shrub. I thought it was larger. It was a flower pot." I covered my face. The double laughed, not cruelly. He never laughed cruelly, and that was perhaps the most infuriating thing about him. At length, his expression softened. "Why are you doing this?" I considered several answers. None seemed adequate. Finally, I just told him the truth. "Because everyone likes you." The double was quiet. "That's not it." "Yes, it is." "No." He shook his head. "It's because you're afraid." The words lingered between us. I hated them because, well, they felt accurate. The houses along Maple Street were beginning to glow with evening light. Somewhere, a lawnmower hummed and a porch swing creaked in the distance. For the first time in weeks, neither of us had a joke. Neither of us had an argument. We simply just walked. And for the first time since meeting him, I found myself wondering whether defeating my double was actually possible. And a far more troubling question followed. What if I succeeded? The conversation on Maple Street should have settled matters. A sensible man would have reflected upon the events of the previous weeks, acknowledged a few uncomfortable truths, and moved forward with a renewed commitment to self-improvement. Unfortunately, I was Edwin P. Finch. Sensible behavior has never been my preferred method of learning. For 3 days, I attempted to avoid my double. This proved surprisingly difficult. The man seemed to exist in every corner of my life. If I went to the bakery, someone thanked me for helping repair a fence. If I went to work, someone complimented me on a thoughtful suggestion. If I walked through the neighborhood, people waved enthusiastically and asked whether I planned to organize another charity drive. I had organized no such thing. At one point, a woman thanked me for helping her son prepare for a school interview. I didn't know her son. I was beginning to suspect that I didn't know half the town. The double, apparently, knew everyone, or at least paid attention when they spoke. By Thursday evening, I had reached my limit. I marched directly to the park where I had first encountered him. To my annoyance, he was there, naturally. He sat on the same bench beneath the same maple tree, calmly reading a book while the setting sun painted the sky gold. I approached with purpose. He glanced up. "Good evening, Edwin." "No." He sighed. "That answer again. We're settling this." The double placed a bookmark between the pages and closed the book. "Settling what?" "Everything." I sat beside him. Perhaps not gracefully, but with determination. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Children playing in the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere, a bicycle bell rang. It was a perfectly ordinary evening. An irritatingly peaceful setting for what I intended to be a dramatic confrontation. Finally, I turned toward him. "Why are you here?" The double considered the question, and then he smiled. Not the cheerful smile that had driven me to madness over the previous month, but a quieter smile. "Because you needed me." I rolled my eyes. "There you go again." "No." He shook his head. "I'm serious." I folded my arms. "So you're some sort of guardian angel?" The double laughed. "Heavens, no." "Then what are you?" He looked across the park. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual humor. "I'm the version of you that stopped making excuses." I stared at him. The answer annoyed me immediately, mostly because it sounded plausible. The double leaned back against the bench. "Do you remember that leaky faucet?" "Unfortunately." "You noticed it every day." "Yes." "You could have fixed it." "I suppose." "But you didn't." I frowned. "There was always a reason." "Exactly." The double nodded. "There was always a reason." The words settled heavily between us. The trouble with arguing against the truth is that it requires considerably more effort than arguing against a lie. The double continued. "You wanted to call your mother." "I know." "You wanted to be more organized." "I know." "You wanted to help people." "I know." His expression softened. "You wanted a better life, Edwin." I stared at the ground. A fallen leaf tumbled across the path. Children laughed somewhere behind us. The world seemed determined to remain pleasant while I experienced a personal crisis. At last, I looked up. "Then why couldn't I do it?" The double smiled. For the first time since meeting him, there was no amusement in the gesture, only kindness. "Because wanting isn't the same thing as doing." That one landed directly in the chest. The sort of remark that follows a man home and sits with them at dinner. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then another question occurred to me, one I had somehow avoided asking. "What happens now?" "As it so happens, I've been wondering when you'd ask." That answer concerned me. The double stood. I stood as well. "So?" I asked. "So," he replied, brushing dust from his coat, "I think my work here is finished." The park suddenly felt very quiet. "What does that mean?" "It means you finally figured it out." I felt an unexpected knot form in my stomach. "You're leaving?" "I imagine so." "You imagine?" "To be honest, this is my first time." That was a very double-like answer, annoyingly mysterious. I looked at him carefully. For weeks, I had viewed him as an enemy, a rival, an imposter. Yet standing there beneath the maple tree, he seemed less like an intruder and more like an old friend preparing to depart. The realization suddenly hit me. "When will I see you again?" I asked. The double smiled. "That depends entirely upon you." Before I could demand clarification, a group of children raced between us, chasing a runaway soccer ball. It took only a moment, well, perhaps two, but when they passed, the double was gone. Simply gone. No dramatic flash, no cloud of smoke, no mysterious portal. The bench remained, the tree remained, the evening remained, but the other Edwin P. Finch had vanished. I searched the park until sunset. Then I searched again. I found nothing, no trace, no explanation, no forwarding address. For several days, I expected him to return. Then several weeks, then months. He never did. Life, however, continued. Gradually, things began to change. Well, not all at once and not dramatically. just a little at a time. I fixed things when they broke. I remembered birthdays. I called my mother more often. I even volunteered at the library, though I remained under strict instructions not to spy on anyone. Yeah, old habits die hard. At work, Mr. Peabody eventually promoted me. Winston forgave me for my jealousy. The neighborhood garden flourished despite my limited understanding of tomatoes. And every so often, when faced with a decision, I'd find myself asking a simple question. What would the other Edwin do? The answer was usually irritating, but it was also usually correct. Years later, I'd happened to pass the bakery where I had first encountered him. The same bench stood nearby, the same street bustled with life. I paused for a moment and smiled. The truth is that my double did indeed undo me. He dismantled my excuses. He exposed my laziness. He revealed every comfortable little lie I told myself. It was a thoroughly unpleasant experience. Yet, in all fairness, I was coming apart long before he arrived. And if a man must be undone, I suppose there are worse things than being rebuilt. So, if you should ever encounter your own double, don't be too quick to run. Don't be too quick to fight. And above all, don't allow him into your house. He'll notice things. And there you have it, everyone. A tale about an ordinary man who discovered that the person most capable of improving his life was a version of himself who had finally stopped making excuses. Sometimes, the hardest person to compete with isn't someone else at all, but the person you could have been. And thanks for spending your time here with us at the Sounds of Stories. Come back for another adventure. And remember, when the world seems to fade, the stories always remain.